Hello everyone, this is day one of Advent of Code 2021, and in this episode I'll talk about the whole idea, what Advent of Code is, and then I'll walk you through my approach to the solution to this day's tasks, and then the actual solution. So let's get to it. Advent of Code is a website started in 2015 where every December you'll find tasks that you're supposed to do, basically code tasks, because you'll get some problem that you could sometimes even solve in memory in your own head, but then the amount of data that you're supposed to go through is just not, you will not do this with just your own hands or brain. So we write programs for that, so basically programming tasks. But these are all themed in like Christmas, so it makes for a more fun experience than the alternative websites with like tasks like LeetCode or whatever. So I really like this one because the tasks are interesting, they're of varied difficulty, and it's really a great way to learn something like a new language, and you'll also gain some knowledge about like computer fundamentals. This year's edition just started and our first day is behind us, and every day from December the 1st till December the 24th you'll get a task split in two parts. And I think the last one on December 25th is like one part, but that might not be true anymore. So today we had two tasks. Now I'll walk you through my approach to these tasks and the solution. So I opened my editor and there's quite a lot of stuff in here already. This year I want to try out a new language. It's gonna be Unison. I didn't use it for the first day because I don't know anything about the language and I really just wanted this to be quick. But we'll probably look at it in future episodes. So I have a bunch of setup, mostly Nix stuff, just to get Unison and Scala versions right in this repository. As the build tool, I'm using Scala CLI. It's not really a build tool, but I don't really need a build tool. I just need something that is capable of running Scala code with some optional dependencies and some options like linter options, which will make my life easier. I went to the website adventofcode.com and there we have the first task, and I spent way too much time reading the whole intro, which turned out to be like it's not actually part of the exercise, it's part of just the general theme. So if you want to do this quickly, you can probably skip that part when you're on the first day. This basically explains the rules of the whole thing, and then below that we'll find the actual description. Then you get some sample input so that you can see what it's supposed to look like in the end. And then you can play around with that input and finally use your own actual input, and you have some sort of baseline. So here I decided to make my first Scala file. I actually have like conf Scala. This includes my dependencies, like cats, basic stuff, and some compiler options. I also have a standard library somewhere with just some utilities for reading files, because this is what you do pretty much every time. I started by copying the example from the website, storing it in a variable, and I started reading through the description to understand what the goal is. So in this task, given an input, which is a sequence of new line separated numbers, you're supposed to say how many times the numbers change to a bigger number than the previous one. Having read that, I realized I wasn't logged in, so I signed in and I got my input. So this is unique, well, not unique to every player, but you might not have the same input as someone else. So I pasted that into a resource just so that it would be easier to read it later without having to copy paste it again. And I started my interactive Scala CLI session. So I just started running the code repeatedly. At this point, we didn't have any code, so I started making some adjustments to the input, the example input that I got. So I got the example input as a string, and I wanted to split it into the lines to get a list and then convert them to numbers. But around this point, I realized that I was using syntax as if this was a script. I wanted to write things on the top level. I think in the end I will use Metal's worksheets for that, but here I decided to change my Scala file to an SC file so that it would be in the format of like Ammonite scripts, which is supposed to be compatible with Scala CLI as far as I know. So I tried to do that, but then the IDE didn't really like it, so I went back to a standard approach. And I thought I was going to use Scala 3, and I did a main method like this with the main annotation, but eventually we'll find out that I had actually configured the project to use 213 before, because it's just what I wanted to use. I had some issues before with Scala 3 in this exact project, and I didn't want this to impact the whole experience. So I went and tried to get my input right, So we converted it. I split it with by white space. So every line would end up in a separate entry of the iterator. Actually, I think it would be an array. So split returns an array, and then I map on it to convert all the values to integers, just to be sure that I don't get any empty lines, which is sometimes the case, especially when you read from file and you have like a trailing new line. I filtered the input to exclude the lines that would be empty if trimmed. So basically, if they consist of just white space or nothing. I don't think the trim was necessary here because we split by white space, but I left it here anyway. So then once I had that list, I thought for a second what to do with it and decided to do a sort of sliding approach. But I didn't actually think to use the method called sliding. It would have also worked, like if you said sliding 2, it would be equivalent to what I'm about to do here. But instead I used zip. So I took the list of the numbers and I zipped it with itself, but only the tail. When you zip a list with its own tail, you'll get a list with n-1 elements, and you'll get the pairs of consecutive elements. So this is how I approach this. You can do this in any other way, but this is, I think, a reasonable one. And as an upside over sliding, or at least over sliding the the standard untyped variant of it, we have a very specific type for the elements inside the result. It's a tuple. It's not a list, it's not a sequence, it's a tuple of exactly 2 elements. So then, given that fact that it's a tuple, we can pattern match on it as a tuple, and this match is always going to succeed. The compiler can guarantee that, and then we can just compare, like we can check whether the new number is larger than the previous one. And I put this into account. So this will return the amount of items that match this criteria in the sequence, and then that was the solution to the first part of the task for the example. So then I changed my example, and I had to basically move my file into the directory that I had created the day before. And then I realized I was going to use Scala 213, but this was Scala 3 code. So I made some adjustments to make it work in Scala 213, basically wrap the whole thing in an object and extend up instead of having a main annotated method. And once I had all that, I read the input from the file, which admittedly took me a little too long because I later realized that I had to run Scala CLI for like the whole project, not just this one file, because otherwise it wouldn't see the lib file, the standard library that I had created. So then I read the file, it actually worked, and given that file, I could work with that. So I replaced the input to use my file input instead of the example, and then the split by white space was no longer necessary because this is already part of the standard library that I had created. And I got a number, and this was actually the solution to my task, to my first half of the task, so I submitted it. And then normally when you do this, you'll get a star, and the rest of the task, like the second star, the second part of the day, will unlock. So I started reading through part 2. And basically here, the problem was the same as before, except they didn't want to count how many times the number changes to a higher one. They wanted to do this on a different basis. Like you would go for every 3 numbers in a sequence. So basically sliding of size 3 going by 1. You would have to sum all these elements and say how often these change to a larger one. So the core idea of the problem is the same. And I actually didn't have to make too many changes. So I tried using the sliding method first and then doing the whole zip with tail thing. And I would group basically all the items into groups of 3 and sliding by 1. So this 1 is the default parameter of like how many elements you should move by. And for each group like that, I would just sum the elements and then basically proceed as normal, as usual. I had to convert that to a list eventually because zip doesn't exist on an iterator, and this is actually what we got from sliding and from sliding.map. So after converting to a list, I could just proceed with the code as previously, and then it was just a matter of commenting or uncommenting part of a line to get the solution for the first part or the second part. So I submitted the answer to the second part, and that was basically it. Usually I don't recommend that you do what I'm about to do here, but I did some cleanup here in this code. I don't recommend it too much because if you're someone like me who likes perfection, you will just spend hours and hours making this code as clean as possible. That's not the point of the whole idea, the whole month of fun. So I recommend that you just stop when it starts working and you just move on with your day. But I did a refactoring here. Also, this code now only produced the result for the second part. So I wanted obviously to have both parts. So I did some cleanup with regards to the packages. I removed the package from both files, and now it was a matter of writing the code in a way that avoids duplicating all of this, but still allows you to get both outputs. And then also adding like some information about like part 1, part 2. So that was basically it. So the only part that changes between these two solutions, like part 1 and part 2, is basically what you put into this zip with tail. And basically the input is the same list, but you can put it through a different transformation, like a transformation or no transformation at all before you start actually zipping it. And here I just made a function that takes some data that then it's zipped and counted. But another improvement that you could make is not take a list of data, but take like a function from list to list that will basically prepare the data, and the data can be fetched inside the method or outside without passing it explicitly. So that's another idea. Of course, there's like so many possible ways to implement this, but that's just another alternative that you could consider. So yeah, I just changed the outputs to show like part 1, part 2, and called it a day. So this was day 1, and I'm pretty happy with how it went. I guess I could have done the task faster or written the code better, or my whole setup could be better. The tooling that I had set up was not perfect, and I actually started working in the wrong file. So I need to take care to actually do that right next time. Another thing that I would improve in this process here is before I submitted the second solution, like the solution to the second half, I would actually check if the number that I got for the example is the same as the one as on the website. That's how you're supposed to do this. You get basically free test data and you're encouraged to use it, because in the more complicated tasks, you cannot just, randomly get the first number that you get from your solution and submit that. There is like a rate limit, and you cannot submit for like in 1 minute, then maybe for 5, and so on. So it's really a waste of time if you don't test with these examples on your own locally. So this is what I'm going to do next time and in the future tasks. I hope this format is interesting to you, by the way. Like, I know that I'm just talking about the way that I did this. I hope that you did the task as well and that you're part of Advent of Code. It's a really nice experience, and I'm really thankful for the authors of it who made this. In future videos in the series, I will be solving other tasks and describing how I approach the problem. I will not be explaining like the whole idea again, so this should serve as a full introduction, and I think it'll be in series of like 2, 3, maybe 4 days at a time. I guess we'll see how much time I have. So if you enjoyed this, please leave a like, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know how it went, and let me know how you're enjoying Advent of Code, and I'll see you in the next episode.